church planter can walk 20 miles in a day. Give him a bicycle and he can go 3 times as far and be 3 times as effective. Well, it's so good to be back together one more time as we continue our chronological study through the entire New Testament. And today we're back in Matthew chapter 27, about halfway through, and we're looking at the most momentous, significant event of all of human history, for all time. Let me say it a different way. This is the morning of the final day of Jesus' life on earth. This is the beginning of the death of the Son of God. And thankfully, it was a temporary death, as I'm sure you're well aware of. But it's just amazing to me that this story has not resounded through every nook and cranny and every city, town, and village around the world, and that people haven't spent as much time as they need to investigate the truthfulness of the story, because this is momentous. God became a man and then died during a preset time, during a ceremony that had prefigured what he was going to accomplish during that time, the Passover festival in Jerusalem. And, it's just stupendous. There are no human words to describe how significant this is. And so we certainly don't want to rush through this, do we? All of our hopes and dreams, everything that we could ever long or look for, is wrapped up in what's about to happen on that day in history when Jesus died on the cross. Okay, so we're going to start today in Matthew chapter 27, verse number 31, where Jesus' trial is over. He's just experienced mocking by the soldiers there of the Praetorian Guard. And we begin reading once again in verse number 31. After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him and put his own garments back on him and led him away to crucify him. Verse 32, as they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. And so, remember, Jesus was somewhere within Pilate's domain, headquarters there in Jerusalem, and he only had to journey out of Jerusalem, outside the walls, just a very short distance, relatively speaking. It wasn't hours and hours of trudging, carrying his cross, or of Simon of Cyrene carrying his cross. They crucified him right outside the city gates. And this man who was pressed in his service, Simon of Cyrene, rather. Cyrene was an ancient city in modern-day Libya, and so there's often made mention of the fact that this was a man of color. I don't know what difference does that make. In God's eyes, God's not looking at anyone's skin color. It doesn't make any difference at all to God, and it shouldn't make any difference to us, okay? And whoever this man was, he's mentioned in Mark's gospel as being the father of Alexander and Rufus. That's in Mark 15, verse number 21. And I wonder why Mark mentioned that he's the father of these 2 guys, Alexander and Rufus. Probably by the time Mark wrote his gospel, Alexander and Rufus were well-known people within the early church. And so wonder where they got their faith. You just, speculate. I wonder if Simon of Cyrene was so impressed that day as he carried Jesus' cross. Again, he may have already been quite interested in Jesus, just happened to be there when Christ is going out of Jerusalem, because we're told in the other Gospels that there was a huge crowd of people that were falling behind Jesus and Simon as Jesus was led to the place of crucifixion right outside of Jerusalem. Anyways, Alexander Rufus. Rufus is mentioned once again, and this is kind of a rabbit trail, but he's mentioned once again in the last chapter of Romans, I think, Romans 16. And Paul says, "Greet Rufus, a choice man in the Lord." Okay? So you never know what's going to happen when somebody encounters Jesus and gets involved. Hopefully it has a cascade effect down into our children and our children's children, and everywhere we go, we can influence people for Jesus. And it looks as if Simon did that. Now, it's neat to compare the Gospels, because putting them all together, you get a much bigger picture than any one of them portray by themselves. And Luke tells us something that nobody else tells us, the reaction of the people who were lining the streets and following Jesus as he was being led away to crucifixion. So I'm going to just jump over real quick into Luke chapter 23. Verse number 27, and following him was a large crowd of the people. Now remember, this is fairly early in the morning, maybe around 8:30 in the morning, because Christ was crucified about 9 o'clock. And again, it wasn't that long of a journey. And we read again in verse number 27, this large crowd of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting him. Remember, all the trial and so forth all transpired just the night before. They had apprehended Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, put on their mock trial then shortly thereafter. Jesus was detained throughout the night, does his stuff before Pilate, before Herod, and so on. And then when Pilate washes his hands and turns him over to be scourged and so forth, that all takes place early in the morning. And they're trying to, the Jewish leaders are trying to rush this as quickly as they possibly can. Remember, Jesus has just come into Jerusalem days before to this triumphal entry where the crowds were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And the religious leaders were afraid to apprehend Jesus during the Passover lest there be a riot because he was so popular among the people. But so there have been some people who've been aroused that morning, and word spreads quickly, and there's a bunch of people who gather together, seeing Jesus. Oh my goodness, it's too late. The great prophet is being led away. He's carrying his cross. There's now a guy who's employed to carry his cross. And we've got women who were either believers in him or who were sympathetic towards him at least, who are mourning and lamenting him. And this next passage just is mind-blowing. Verse number 28 of Luke 23. But Jesus, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, quote, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed.'" So is Jesus wrapped up in himself? He is not wrapped up in himself. He's wrapped up once again in that unselfish love, feeling sorry for the ones who are feeling sorry for him. Okay? More to say about these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful women. I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.